In today's video I'm going to be sharing with you my favourite witchy, occult, spiritual themed books that I read in 2024. So if you'd like to hear more about my favourites, get yourself a nice hot or cold drink, settle back, relax and enjoy. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. Happy 2025. It's such a weird time. I need to take a walk, I need to ground, it's really wet, there's been winds, I'm not sure how safe it's going to be again, but I'm going out and I'm just gonna try and ground again and just recenter, because yeah, there's been so much going on. It's just been chaotic, it's felt so intense. You know, I really want to talk about like the way things feel in the body, but now is not the time, because today we are talking about the books that I read in 2024 that were my favourite picks that I read in 2024 for witchcraft, spiritual, occult books. And there were some books that I didn't get to, which I was devastated about, but towards the end of the year I was absolutely, burnt out. And to be honest with you, I think I've been living in a state of chronic burnout for a while. Having been diagnosed last year with fibromyalgia because of ongoing chronic pain and chronic fatigue, it made a lot of sense. So I've been learning a lot about how to look after my body and prioritize my body's needs, and I've been tracking my heart rate variability and looking at like stability of my body according to that, and like trying to like sort of think of it as like a weather forecast and really get into the body and understand like what's going on for me. So that's been a real challenge, but because of that and because of other challenges I had at the start of the year, sort of more springtime, I was so burnt out by, you know, the middle of the year, and by the time my birthday rolled around in August, and then the latter half of the year I stopped really reading a lot of occult witchy books and I just focused on reading fiction mostly. So I read less books than I wanted to, but there were still more books than I want to talk about here, because there are quite a few books here that I'm going to talk about. There are other books that were good as well that I'm not going to talk about, but you may see them pop up in the recommended reading for various topics here and there, because this I really want to be like the ones that were my favourite, like the best ones that I read. And it's not that the other ones weren't, it's, you know, occasionally if a book I don't like or don't jive with, I won't talk about it, but occasionally as well, there's been some books in the last few years that I would like to talk about, but then there's more controversial sides to them, so it's harder to discuss. But essentially, if I don't mention it, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. If it's here, then it was a favourite for a reason, is the thing. But then anything else, if I also recommend it for a particular topic, it might show up in other videos. So if there are particular videos on a particular topic, any of the recommended reading that you see in the description box below, they are books that I've read, or they're books that I have on my radar to read, but I will be specific about those ones that I haven't read. So anything in the recommended reading section in my description boxes are books that I've read unless stated otherwise. So with all that said, let's just get straight on into it. Where to start? I'm going to start with a recent book, and that is this amazing book by AnnMaddox. And of course many of you will know and love AnnMaddox. This is Ann's latest book, Witch in Darkness, Magic for Tough Times, Bad Days and Moments of Total Catastrophe. So I reviewed Rebel Witch on the channel a few years ago, which was equally just beautiful. I think out of the two, this is my favourite. Rebel Witch was definitely like a permission slip, I think, like for witches, like whether beginner or intermediate or advanced even, but like just to sort of follow your own craft and to, you know, nurture a craft and hone a craft that is like all yours and really authentic. And I think that's something that Ann does so beautifully. I absolutely love Ann's channel. It's no secret, I think that so many of the offerings that Ann shares are so valuable and really support many people in many stages of life. So there's so many beautiful things to say about Ann, and this book is, I think, testament to that. And many of you of course will know that Ann experienced a huge devastating loss whilst writing this book, and it's a book that I was crying through, and I want to read it again because I feel like the first time around was just absorbing it, taking it in, and I want to read it again and actually like dive deeper with some of the exercises. For context, the book is split into 3 parts. So part 1 is Raw and Real Witchcraft, which goes into the aspects of what a witch in darkness really is, how things feel and look in the dark, how to sort of create a practice that feels maintainable at that level. And then part 2 goes into the actual darkness and what you can do in the darkness, looking through the lens of the body and family, your relationship to yourself, the world and relationships, etc. And then the last part is extra support, so when you're feeling lots of fear or self-doubt, etc. And It's just such a comfort blanket, honestly. Like, there are practices throughout, and there are also lots of journaling prompts as well throughout, and it's honestly just such a beautiful comfort blanket. I'm really, really grateful to Kellyanne for writing this. Just the tears, and yeah, really grateful for this, and this is going to be on my favourites, I think, forever. So yeah, really, really grateful for this book. Thank you, Kellyanne. A book I could not imagine myself without is the Bones and Honey Heathen Prayer Book by Daniel Dulski. It's the author of The Holy Wild, and this is just such a beautiful book. It is a collection of devotional poetry, prose, stories and prayers, and essentially like retellings of mythical stories and poetry, and it's really beautiful for soothing and comforting in amongst various wounds that we're all experiencing at this time and that we may experience throughout our life. So the book is split up into different chapters, and then within each chapter there's different entries which are either poems or stories. So the first one is the Book of Stars, which is prayers for hopes, troublemakers, impossible freaks and stubborn visionaries. And within that, actually, there's one I wanted to read, which is Soup from the Seer Hag, when a terrible vision comes. A visionary sees both grief and joy on the horizon. To be a seer during these volatile times means witnessing the woundedness of humanity in all its terrible forms. This prayer is for the moments when the visionary's eyes are met by tragedy. Ah, this seer is struck by the horror of humanity's current season, frozen into stillness by another storm in this, our longest winter. When the mightiest visions come, they come swift, steady and sure. They are marred by old blades and steeped in new blood. When the prophecies are too terrible to speak aloud, I bid the old seer hag find me in my dreams and gift my soul with a bit of soup and song. I bid this elder tend a humble fire just for me and listen to my sharper stories of flood waters and flames. She, this elder, and I, we wear the same amulet. I think and I know her to be my nameless foremother. I know her to be the unburnable one, and surely I will wake held by the long arms of time, the taste of her heady brew on my tongue, and the sound of her sombre prophet's song echoing in the red chambers of my seer's heart. Together we hold the madness of this moment. Together we find meaning in the meaningless. That brought me so much comfort, and it brought me to tears as well, and a number of really beautiful ones. There's another one that I wanted to share. Maybe I won't read the whole thing, but it's in chapter 7. Chapter 7 is the Book of the Wounded Healer, Prayers for Heartache, Healing and the Shining Self, and this was just like, oh, medicine. So this is 7.9, I, Chiron, Prayer of the Mythic Wounded Healer. The Greek mythology of Chiron illuminates the archetype of the wounded healer. He was a great medicine keeper who could not stop bleeding, yet he still shared his healer's wisdom. This is his prayer. Some say the gods left these lands long ago, but I say the land is God, and I, Chiron, say we are still here. Sing for us. Tonight I limp along this broken path with an aching belly and a medicine bag full of the poisoned arrows that took me down. Strangers on the road call me fringe dweller and turn away, but the old hooded hags who see me coming wink and give me a travelling cake. A true healer must be wounded. These medicine women know, for only those who bleed know how to stitch a cut. Only those with broken bones understand the treasure of a splint and the necessity of a long convalescence. Beware the healers who show no wounds, who claim to know no sorrow, who would kick my good leg and take me down. Beware the wounded ones who show no healing, who claim to know no joy. Both who would sell you a snake oil brewed from their own bitterness. Neither will soothe your soul. Some say the gods left these lands long ago, but I say the land is God. I, Chiron, say we are still here. Sing for us. Sing for me. And I was like, oh, I love this book. I absolutely love Daniel Dulski's work. I have a couple of other of her books and they are just, oomph. This is a heathen prayer book, basically. So if you resonate with the idea of being like a bone witch, heathen, pagan, like earth witch, in the dirt kind of witch, an artistic witch, a kind of word witch, mind witch, I mean any witch, I think you need this book, honestly. Like, it's so healing. It's like a spell book. It's a prayer book, it's a spell book, it's all of it, and there's so much in here, there's so much to mine. The one thing I think I would love in this book is an index with specific words that you can look up for. So if you've got grief, then it will give you a list of the particular prayers and stories that align with that. I mean, obviously you've got a section here for grief, but because the wording is so beautiful and it is like poetry, sometimes it's harder to know what if you're looking for something particular. Some of the ways in which the prose, the poetry is crafted and written, the titles are more abstract and you kind of have to actually read them to understand what they're about. You can't just look at the title of what it is. Some of them you can, like New Year's Eve, a song for overzealous visionaries, that's quite clear. The Insomniac Song, okay, again, Lament of the Sleepless Witch. But others, Midnight Memories to Wake a Spontaneous Splendor. That's within the Book of the Heathen Queen, Prayers for Empowerment, Sovereignty and Truth-Telling. As you can see here, it's just very in-depth and wordy in terms of the titles of each entry, etc. So I think it's one that you need to read in full, enjoy, immerse yourself in. You could use this for bibliomancy, you could go back to it. It's very much like Women Who Run with the Wolves. And in fact, there is a story of Bluebeard in this book as well, like a retelling of Bluebeard, which is obviously in Women Who Run with the Wolves as well. And it is one that you can dip in and out of like that. But I would recommend like reading the whole thing, being immersed in the whole thing, because you really feel, you know, you're going on a journey, but you can dip in and out. And I think that that's the beauty of it, is it can be read both ways and whichever you want to do. I have this by my bedside. It is just so beautiful, especially during challenging dark times, you know, which we are in, which we are all facing personally and collectively. So like, I love this book. I highly recommend Daniel Dosky's work. If you haven't read any by Daniel Dosky, please do. And yeah, this one is just beautiful and truly a salve if you're looking for something like that right now. So a book that I really enjoyed and that had a lot of praise this year was The Bones Fall in a Spiral by Mortalis, and this is a necromantic primer. There's a lot of information in here. So this is like a deep dive primer, if you will, into necromancy. It contains more than 50 exercises, rituals and spells and recipes. Essentially, Mortalis shares their practice as well as in like ethics and like how to respectfully work with the dead. So it shares the history and power of death magic and also demonstrating its ability to bring comfort and connection. They show you a variety of ways to build a meaningful and safe practice. Safety is key, and there's quite a lot in here on safety and like how to do this appropriately. So this is great for anyone who's wanting to work with spirits of the dead, anyone who wants to work with things like blood magic, wants to work with grave dirt, etc. There were some parts of the book that are not relevant to me, but still really interesting, and it's an excellent book to have on your shelf if you are a folk witch or a death witch or any kind of practitioner who wants to work in the dirt on the land that you're in and with spirits. It's a great book, and I really enjoyed immersing myself in Mortalis's practice. There's also really lovely images as well throughout, which I enjoyed. It's very easy to read and really nicely laid out. I really enjoyed this one. Next up is Mastering Magic by Matt Oren, and this is very different from Mastering Witchcraft by Paul Hewson, which I have read and potentially I've talked about on the channel. I don't know. I read it a long time ago. I don't know, but I was just looking for it and I cannot see it. Ah, there it is. I see it. Yes. I thought I'd lost it then. So very different from Mastering Witchcraft. Mastering Magic is basically like a continuation from Matt Oren's Psychic Witch, and there's also the Psychic Tarot. I think it's Psychic Tarot or something along those lines. I've not read that one yet, but this is a course in spellcasting for the Psychic Witch. This is a lovely book. I just so align with a lot that Matt talks about. So first of all, Matt shares some of his experiences as a young witch. It's basically like a full course, essentially. It's a very good in-depth beginner's book, and it's so good that I think intermediates and advanced practitioners can also get a lot from it. There's a lot of exercises. I actually read this at the start of 2024 and I'm feeling like I would like to read it again, but it was so good. You know, I think that you get to a certain point when you've read a lot of books and a lot of practices within you might do in different ways, but there are a lot of crossovers. I think just immersing yourself within a particular author's practice, it's so powerful, but there's so much in here. Like, it's definitely worth its weight in gold. Let's create personalized and soul-stirring magic with best-selling author Matt Oren. Boost your psychic ability and incorporate the greater mysteries of magic into your practice. A companion to the international bestseller Psychic Witch, this groundbreaking book features more than 60 spells and is first of its kind to focus on casting magic to build a divide between the seen and unseen worlds. Matt teaches you how to enchant yourself as a powerful psychic psychic witch by connecting with the witch's tools, elements, the moon, the seasons, and the planets. And you'll learn the mechanics of spellwork and how to make your magic as effective as possible. In addition to Matt's own tried and true castings, Mastering Magic features more than a dozen spells from well-known witches and practitioners, including Christopher Penzac, Judica Ellis, Juliet Diaz, Storm Fairy Wolf, Laura Tempest Sackroff, Devon Hunter, Madame Pamita, and others. It's really a beautiful book, and I would highly recommend this as a beginner's book. Like, amazing. 5 stars, to be honest. Love it. Laura Tempest Sackroff, I read Visual Alchemy last year. This very nicely follows on from Sigil Witchery. It goes more in depth as well. It's very much geared towards art witches, but you don't have to be an art witch in order to incorporate this. I mean, again, it goes a lot into sigils, looking at the meanings of shapes. A follow-up to the bestseller, Sigil Witchery, Visual Alchemy takes a deeper look at the extraordinary connection between art and magic. Laura Tempest Sackroff expands on her signature Sigil Witchery method, an accessible and intuitive approach to crafting effective sigils. She covers numerous topics, including how to connect with your artist within, draw inspiration to you, and easily incorporate art into your ritual practice. Visual Alchemy presents art magic in 2 parts, create and collaborate. You'll start with techniques for optimizing your creativity, such as crafting a personal symbolic language and solving problems with design concepts. You'll then explore magic that connects you with others, from sharing spells to making public art. Featuring more than 50 shared magical sigils, this book empowers you to put aside fear and unleash the full magic potential of your imagination. I would highly recommend it if you've already read Sigil Witchery and if you enjoyed it, but do I think you need to read it? No. I think that you can get what you need to get about LTZ's practice and Sigil Witchery from the first book, but if you were a big fan of that and you want to dive deeper and you're particularly interested in art and shapes and magic and imagery and magic, then I would recommend it. So here is an example, a chart of my personal symbol codex inspired by the tarot. So you may have come up with a codex for yourself with tarot. I did as well when I was tracking my tarot readings in that way. It talks about the movement and the meanings behind shapes. You know, Sigil Witchery did as well and talked about like shapes from like caveman drawings and the meaning of shapes and how we relate to them and what, you know, we think of when we see certain shapes and such, and how that can then inform your sigil practice. So it's a nice one to have if you're interested. Really, really lovely, and I would recommend. This is a book I absolutely treasure. I love this book. So I bought this book at the museum in Cornwall, which is a cabinet of folklore and magic. I wasn't actually aware this museum existed. It's kind of in partnership with the Museum of Witchcraft, and it's run by Steve Patterson, who has worked with the Museum of Witchcraft before. This museum is Steve's museum in Cornwall in Falmouth, and I would highly recommend you go. It is so beautiful. I do have a vlog that I'm going to share at some point. This is a collection of 19th century West Country charms and spells, and that is very relevant to me because I live in Devon, which is part of the West Country. So you've got Old Joan's Book of Spells, and Old Joan has a name for a particular reason, and it references the Wise Woman's Cottage in the Museum of Witchcraft. If you've been, I also have a vlog from the Witchcraft Museum on my channel if you want to go see that. So it goes into the significance of various practices, and then part 3 is Witchcraft and the Wise Woman's Cottage, a West Country cunning tradition. So it's really, really interesting. I mean, it explores so much. It explores like real figures that Joan may have been like based on. Joan is our wise woman, right? I've dog-eared so much of this book. I've made notes, and there's just so much that I want to share in this book. So I have to see if there's something I can share with you now. Hemp seed divination charm. This charm was said at midnight in the graveyard while the hemp seed was thrown over one's left shoulder. Hemp has many folkloric associations, most of which seem to be derived from consciousness altering properties. This charm has also been recorded in Oxfordshire and Welsh marches. In this Cornish version, it's specifically connected with midsummer, though in other versions it is recommended to be spoken on St. Mark's Eve, All Hallows Eve, or Christmas Eve. And that really nicely ties into my previous video regarding like folklore around Yuletide season in Devon. Lover's charms, yarrow, love spell, beauty spells for firm flesh and breasts, apples, charm for warts, there's a lot of those, charms for bruises, there's a lot of charms for protection, and then there's different practices to divination and scrying. There's like actual descriptions of what you see in the Witchcraft Museum as well. And then there's also a transcript of the recording that you can hear when you visit the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Boscastle, and that's spoken aloud so you can hear the actual spells that are referenced. This collection of spoken charms and spells was collected and compiled by Lavanna Morgan. author and founder of the Friends of the Museum of Witchcraft. They were played in the Wise Woman's Cottage for a period stretching between 1998 and 2015. So there's the Witch's Ladder, a spell used by Cornish Pellers to cure burns, a spell to shapeshift into a hare first recorded in the Confessions of Isabel Gowdy. In one of my previous videos a year or two ago, I talked about Isabel Gowdy because I read Ash Williams' book, which I highly recommend, The Black Book of Isabel Gowdy. There's some really, really interesting things in there which can help to inform your practice if you're interested. Classic protection charm, black luggy, hammerhead, rowan tree and red thread, put the warlocks to their speed. There's also protection charms, candle spells. It's kind of like a Bible. It's amazing, and this is actually really special because I got to meet Steve and he also signed my book for me. So I was actually chatting to Steve before I knew that he was Steve, because there's a beautiful collection, a library of books at the front, and I was having a look and there were a lot of books by Sabine Baring-Gould, who was a folklorist and he was also a priest. He wrote a hymn called Onward Christian Soldiers, and it's one of my late paternal grandmother's favourite hymns, and we sang that at my wedding, my hubby and I, and we actually got married at the church that Sabine Baring-Gould was a priest at. So it was all of these like weird, uncanny kind of things coming together. My hubby and I celebrated our 10-year wedding anniversary last year, so we're going into our 11th year of marriage. And another uncanny fact that I forgot to actually mention here is that we were on this trip to Cornwall and visited Falmouth during our 10-year wedding anniversary celebration trip. So my hubby and I went to this museum and I saw all these books about Sabine Baring-Gould, which was related to our wedding, and then was discussing that with Steve. So it was really very uncanny and coincidental and really interesting. Yeah, Sabine Baring-Gould was a really interesting character. He wrote folk songs and hymns and led a Christian life, but also explored a lot of folklore, and there's a lot about ghosts and such, and so there's a lot of collected folklore and books by Sabine Baring-Gould, and he's just a really interesting character. And so I was leafing through some of those and chatting to my husband, and then Steve and I started talking and I didn't even realise it was this Steve. But yeah, really interesting, and I decided to pick up the book and I absolutely love it. I just think it's 100% worth a read, especially if you are a folk witch, folk practitioner, because there's so much of the folklore. I mean, depending on where you are, of course, Devonshire, Somerset, Cornwall, it's all relevant to me because of where I live. But there's of course folklore from many other places as well that you can pull on, and there are traditional and folkloric witchcraft traditions in other areas, of course, but you can incorporate some of these charms into your own practice by making them your own. There's a number that I have recreated, recrafted with my own words, and that I utilize for various purposes and love. So this is one that I just love to dip in and out of again and again, but it's got notes and highly well loved, and I would highly recommend that you visit either of the museums if you are down in Cornwall. And I love this book. Financial Sorcery is a book that I read for the first time this year. I think it's basically the only book of Jason Miller's that I hadn't read, and I decided to read it this year because I kind of needed it this year, and to be honest, oh my gosh, it's so good. Like, it did not disappoint. Just like Jason Miller's other books, you know, he's straight to the point, no messing around, just lots and lots of really good information grounded in reality and really important points that will help you to get yourself into a place where you are able to then manifest what it is that you want. Financial Sorcery will give you the step-by-step instructions on how to improve your fiscal situation. You will learn how to stop using magic to fix emergency problems and start using it to build your dream life. Use times of economy uncertainty to create new opportunities rather than cause problems. Work joyfully with money as part of your spiritual discipline rather than a necessary evil. Make offerings to increase the flow of prosperity around you. Ditch old concepts and retrain your mind to make money in today's world. Use the interplay of macro and micro enchantments to find jobs and get promoted. Deploy strategic sorcery to kill your debt and create secondary income streams that will ensure continued revenue. Now, I would recommend this to people who even aren't like witchy because there's so many like good real life tips in this book. Like, it's really, really good. So definitely read this if you haven't already, and any other books by Jason Miller. I think I've read all of Jason Miller's books now, but yeah, I would definitely reread and reread again. They are so good, and this was not an exception. Very good. Just because I loved it, and I read it obviously in December. This is The Fright Before Christmas by Jeff Ballinger. This is Surviving Krampus and Other Yuletide Monsters. I really enjoyed this, and I talk about it in my Yuletide videos, so do check them out. But it's just such a beautiful visual book, you know, and so informative and interesting. It's not one that you want to make notes in particularly. It's a very beautiful book. It's one that you could have out on your coffee table. Yeah, my kids were a little bit like, when they saw it. But yeah, it is a beautiful book and it was so fun. It goes into all of the different folkloric beasties and in different areas and the history, etc. And I highly enjoyed, highly recommend. Oh, Egregores by Mark Stavish. Now, I highly respect Mark Stavish. This was a book that I struggled with, I'm not gonna lie. It was intense. This is Egregores, the occult entities that watch over human destiny. So I really enjoyed this. It was very much a deep dive. There's a lot of history in here and a lot of context around times and cultures in which Egregores have been used. So it goes into what an egregore is understood to be: an autonomous psychic entity created by a collective group mind. An egregore is sustained by belief, ritual and sacrifice and relies upon the devotion of a group of people. An egregore that receives enough sustenance can take on a life of its own, becoming independent deity with powers its believers can use to further their own spiritual advancements and material desires. So this is the first book devoted to the study of egregores, and it examines the history of egregores with detailed and documented examples and explores how they were created, sustained, directed and destroyed. He explains how egregores were well known in the classical period when they were consciously called into being to watch over city-states. He explores the egregore concept as it was understood in the Corpus Hermeticum and offers further examples from Tibetan Buddhism, Islam, modern esoteric orders such as the Order of the Golden Dawn and Rosicrucianism, and the writings of H.P. Lovecraft and Kenneth Grant, and the followers of Julius Evola and Aleister Crowley. Stavish provides instructions on how to identify egregores, free yourself from a parasitic and destructive collective entity, and destroy an egregore should the needs arise. Revealing how egregores form the foundation of nearly all human interactions, the author shows how egregores have moved into popular culture and media, underscoring the importance of intense selectivity in the information we accept and the ways we perceive the world and our place in it. So for me, I do want to read this again. It was very detailed. There was a lot in it. I'm sure a lot went over my head. Fundamentally, I would really recommend anyone who works with egregores or who creates their own servitors to read this, because I think it's full of actual contextual examples and warnings, really. I think if I'd have read this first, I think perhaps I wouldn't have had certain like mishaps occur when creating servitors and such. I'll just leave it there. But I think this is something that you can deepen into though. I think now I've read this, I've opened my mind a little bit more to what egregores are, and I think that I'm definitely in a better position now. I feel like more armed with knowledge and information, and I think Mark Stavish is really well researched, and I highly recommend it for anyone who's a chaos practitioner or who works with these kinds of spirits, egregores, servitors, etc. Highly recommend. I finally read Weaving Fate this year, Hypersigils, Changing the Past and Telling True Lies, and I absolutely loved it. I have notes, like this is probably the one I've made the most notes on. Oh, apart from another one that I'm going to show you I made a lot of notes in. I love this and I've gotten it out again and again and again. Just such a great writer. I haven't read any of Aidan's other books, but I want to. But I went for this one first because I felt that it was the one that would support me the most in my practice currently, and is something that I have done before, because I have written stories even as in the form of plays as well to manifest things before in that way, in that sort of weaving fate way, writing what you want to come to pass. I've done that, but to see this whole system was like, wow, like this is a whole way to practice it that feels very complete, and there's rituals around it as well. Like the black book, according to the back of the book, is a journal form of hypersigil. So a hypersigil is essentially a long form written approach to magic that allows us to write the life we desire into being. So essentially, if you're not aware, an example of it was Grant Morrison's work in The Invisibles, which is a comic book written by Grant Morrison, and essentially he wrote a character for himself and he wrote all of these things that were happening. Grant Morrison is a chaos magician and just a great resource to learn from if you can find videos of Grant Morrison speaking, or there is a book that I don't have. It's a massive chaos book that has essays from Grant Morrison. That's a book that I would definitely like to get. I have read an essay by Grant Morrison that I really enjoyed. Essentially, it's writing what you want to come to pass, or writing a reality into fruition, essentially, into manifestation. And that's where the black book comes in what to practice. And then there's the corridor, which is an imaginal tool used to help visit other times and places. Through it, we can shift unhelpful influences from past events and positive directions and connect with our future selves and help manifest the lives we desire. The Fever Stone is a magical process for releasing energy trapped in traumatic events and ancestral pain states, transmuting energy like alchemy. We can then transmute this energy into raw power for use in creating internal and external changes we seek. So this book reminded me a lot of Visual Magic by Jean Free, which is so good. I think it still stands the test of time. So it's very shamanic in its nature, but then it's also chaos magic as well, but then a lot about being embodied. And I say the word shamanic, but I mean more ecstatic practices, more like rooted in the earth and in what goes into like all of the basics of magic as well. So like I wouldn't recommend this to beginners, but I think if you've read like a handful of beginner books, you could probably start with this. So I'd say it's intermediate reading and beyond really, but I'm sure that many beginners could read this and get a lot from it. So I love this book. It's one of my favorites of the year. I would highly recommend it to anyone who works chaos magic or any witch, to be honest with you, anyone who works with energies, anyone who works in a kind of shamanic way, anyone who works with healing energies, healing trauma, alchemizing pain, etc., shadow work. I just really resonated with it. And also, if you've read this and you liked it, try reading Visual Magic by Jean Free, because that's excellent as well, and definitely before its time, I think. I really think they were quite similar, quite aligned. Yeah, I love this book. Really highly recommend. So this book, Spellcraft and Spellwork by Ariana Carrasca. Did I say that right? I'm so sorry. This is our very own Oak Witch, and I was really, really grateful to receive this from Ari. And this is a Pagan Portals book, so again, it's a very slim book. I mean, there are no words wasted, you know, like it goes straight to the point. I don't think we've ever had a book that sort of lays it out like this for beginners in terms of concepts. It goes into so much. So this talks about the history of magic, then magical theory, so the different definitions of magic, different models of magic. So it talks about the spirit model, the psychological model, the energy model. And these are like really, really important things, but in a lot of beginner witchcraft books, you don't get that. So then principles of magic, the metaphysics, the law of knowledge, the law of correspondence, the law of similarity, as above, so below in Hermeticism, spectrums of practical magic, understanding folk magic and ceremonial magic, baneful and beneficial magic, magical intentions, types of magical working, so incantations, charms, amulets, sigil, jinxes. It talks about the importance of meditation and these foundational magical practices, grounding and centering. Then there's some different techniques as well that Ari recommends. One thing I noted here about some of these exercises, it's really nice because they're aphantasia friendly. So if visualization is a struggle for you, this is such a beautiful exercise. It's on page 41 and it's simple sensory centering. So you're identifying what you can feel, smell and taste, and I thought that was exceptional. Love that. Then different types of spells for protection, etc. Crafting spells, and essentially a whole kind of encapsulated, like, here's what a spell is. You know, you want your goal, you want your ingredients, your methodology, charging the energy, the action, and then there's the process, like literally cleanse, center, grounding, casting a circle, crafting the spell, and grounding and centering again, and then post-spell procedures. It talks as well a lot about the mundane work that you can do, how to keep track of your practice as well, journaling your magic, what to expect. A couple of really popular spells at the back as well, so like Evil Eye Jewelry Ward spell, Find Me a Better Job spell, you know, these are things that a lot of people need. I Am Beauty self-love spell, just lovely. I highly, highly enjoyed this, and I think such a great achievement, so well done Ari. This is a great book and I'm really, really proud to have it on my bookshelf and to have reviewed it, so thank you so much for sending it to me, and I highly recommend. I would recommend this for beginners as one of the must-reads, and it's just great to have on your bookshelf as well. It's a great go-to, great explainer. I think Ari speaks really eloquently and writes really excellently as well, so I would highly, highly recommend. So I've literally just finished and put away the books, and then I realised I forgot to mention an incredible book that I was so kindly sent a digital copy of this year by Jasmine Ambrosia. It is essentially an expansion of Jasmine Ambrosia's first book, which is the Book of Witchflight. It's an expanded spirit codex with all of the spirits that Jasmine and her coven work with. So that's a really, really great addition to the first book. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend you pick up the first book. There is a third as well that I'm going to order soon, so I'll hopefully be reading that 2025 and can't wait. And so thank you so much, Jasmine, for sending me that, because I think there's just been such a need for this kind of personal gnosis work in the community, and I highly recommend Jasmine's work for that. It's just, mwah, chef's kiss. The Herbal Alchemist Handbook, a complete guide to magical herbs and how to use them. So this was really good because it went into a lot of the planetary ways to work with herbs as well, and there's just a lot in here. You could work with this just solely on its own and have like a whole practice. So it talks about all the herbs and their planetary signatures. Then it talks about how to alchemically blend herbal formulas. So it talks about incenses, oils, bath salts and bath herbs, herbal amulets and magical potpourri, and then filters, elixirs and fluid condensers, which I haven't really seen in many books of this type before. Then combining planetary and elemental influences, custom formulas to balance, transform, empower and manifest, numerology, and then astrology with your natal chart, advanced herbal alchemical work with your astrology chart. So you can really go deep into this. And then there's appendixes as well with herbal materia, magica, etc. So there's different ways to find the herbs. You can literally use it as one that you dip in and out of to find correspondences. You can also dip into it for learning how to create certain formulas and also understanding more about the herbs themselves and the planetary signatures. Really, really lovely book. I would highly recommend. In this book, Karen Harrison shows you how to select herbs based on their astrological associations as well as their medicinal properties. You will learn how to blend incense, create ceremonial oils, make bath salts and much more, and use them in your magical practice. Included are more than 150 herbs and their energy associations. I really enjoyed it. I think it's a great one to add to your collection if you're a green witch, if you're into herbalism like I am. I'm very much folk herbalism and I'm very much into astrology and planetary magic as well, so it really aligns. I haven't crafted anything particular from this book, but I have used this book in the creation of my own things, and that I think is where you can get into some great magic with this, when you're utilizing the information that's been brought together to, you know, facilitate the blending of your own alchemical herbal formulas, etc., when you're actually applying what you've learnt from this book. I would highly recommend to anyone who's interested in dabbling a little further, anyone who's sort of read a couple of beginner green witch books but wants to go a little bit deeper, wants a little bit more than just correspondences as well. I think this is the one for you. This book, The Spirits of Ouija, 4 Decades of Communication, Karen A. Dahlman. Now there's some stuff in here that's very much personal. Karen Dahlman, it's my Ouija tell-all, a 40-year odyssey spent communicating with my spirit friends from the great beyond. They speak of personally relevant insights, spiritual knowledge and truths, beneficial healing, closure on grief, opening to greatness, developing your empowerment, spiritual growth and soul evolution, to name a few. I share with you the unfair misconceptions Ouija has received over the years, provide the how-tos, the don'ts, the warnings, the recommendations, and identify various consciousnesses with whom I've communicated. So there are stories in here of happenings, experiences that Karen has had, and then there's actual accounts from sessions and various entities, and then also there's instructions on how to do this. So I have dog-eared the actual pages that go into how to use a Ouija board, etc., because I based the work that I did with the Ouija board that I have, that you may have seen, and when I've used the Ouija board and had sessions with the Ouija board, I've always used these as guidance to ensure that I'm cleansed, grounded, centered, etc., and then opening the portal and then opening and closing with a prayer, etc. And there's breath work in here as well. It's just really, really nice to hear exactly what someone who is a professional in this does, and it goes into other aspects as well, like who you might be communing with and just like what are the ways to do it, you know. So if you are really, really new to working with a Ouija board, I would highly recommend this as a place to start. It's obviously coming from someone who has done this their whole life for 4 decades, for a very long time. This is, I think, self-published, but I would definitely recommend it, you know. There's a lot, as I said, of experience in here, but it was highly worth a read. I read another book around this time, which is a very popular book about working with the dead, working with spirits, and I didn't enjoy it as much. I didn't enjoy it as I thought I would have. They're a very popular writer though, so I won't be talking about that book right now. It wasn't bad, I enjoyed this one more. I think I got more out of it. I loved this book. Oh my gosh. The Witch's Guide to the Paranormal by J. Alan Cross, How to Investigate, Communicate and Clear Spirits. I think anyone who works with the other side, the other world, needs to read this book. It's not just for witches, but this is written for witches, right? It's the Witch's Guide. So as a witch, your ability to manipulate energy allows you to interact with ghosts in ways that other investigators can't. Discover how to use your magical toolkit to identify and resolve the 4 main types of haunting: residual, poltergeist, human earthbound, and inhuman entity. J. Alan Cross guides you through the basic principles of haunting while building a foundation of paranormal investigation, witchcraft, and mediumship skills. You will learn how to craft a seal, open and close portals, perform an exorcism, and help spirits cross over. With more than 40 exercises and rituals, this book shows you how to make the most of your talents so that you can bring peace to restless spirits and those they haunt. Now, I highly enjoyed this. I think, again, lots of experiences, lots of stories. I think I learned so much from this book, honestly. I mean, a lot of it, again, I already knew, because things like smoke cleansing, things like, you know, sensing the energy, etc. And a lot of this is covered at the start. So it goes over the power of will, it goes over exercises like grounding, psychic shielding, etc. So if you are more of a beginner, there is that in here, although I would recommend that you read a few beginner books if you are new. But if you're just interested in paranormal investigation and working with the dead, working with spirits, then you could go straight to this, honestly. It's got pretty much everything you need in it. I highly recommend this. Oh my gosh, I just loved it. There's a lot about mediumship in here as well. Like, mediumship is something I've studied for a while. I'm really interested in it. Obviously, developing your psychic abilities and such, it crosses over very much so. So if you're interested in working on developing your mediumship skills, developing your psychic skills, developing your skills communing and supporting spirits and the dead, you can't go wrong with this. Honestly, I would recommend every witch to read this. It's just 5 stars. Mwah, chef's kiss, love it. This is a honorary mention. This is a book that came out a while ago. I've read other books by this author, but not this book, because it was a beginner book and I didn't feel necessary to read. I decided to do it for this channel. I read another beginner book this year as well for the channel that I'm not mentioning here, because I think it didn't provide as much as this book. So, you know, you might be able to guess what that book is. Again, by a really amazing author who I really highly respect, and I've loved several books by that author as well. But this book, I think, is a really great beginner book if you are especially very new to the concept, if you are a particular type, I think, of witch. So the reason I decided to get this and read this was because I happened to be in my local bookshop after attending one of the marches for Palestine. I wanted to just be in an area with books and surround myself with books for a little bit after the march. I was looking in the witchy section, which is not very big at all. You know, there's just a few texts, and then there's some like very popular spiritual texts and stuff alongside. There's not a lot, a couple of tarot decks. But this is one of the books that's pretty much always there. I've read a couple of books by Juliet Diaz before, and I've loved her books. I've loved her writing. And essentially there was a very young girl looking at the witchy books. So I say very young girl, teenager, 16, 17, was looking and had picked up one of those ones that looked like it was written by AI, you know, one of those Wicca 101 books. And I had to fight with myself because I didn't want to be that person who did this, but also I just had an inkling that what I was going to do was right, so I did it. And I just said, if you're interested, I would highly recommend this author right here. And I said, I haven't read this book yet, but I would highly recommend this author. I've read a couple of other books by her and I really like her writing, and this I've heard great things about as well. And so I recommended a book to someone and I hadn't even read it, and then I thought, well, I have to go and read it now, don't I? And just make sure I recommended a good book. I enjoyed this book a lot. And yes, no, it is a beginner book. You don't need to rush out and buy this if you've been practicing, you know, for a few years. And if you have read a few beginner books, you don't need to. But I loved this book. It was a comfort read. I very much enjoyed it. It's a lovely book, the way that it looks. There's a lot of lovely practices in here. It's really lovely for self-care and self-love. I think that Juliet Diaz does that so beautifully. So I would highly recommend this to beginners. It would be one of my beginner texts, especially if someone is younger coming to the practice. I mean, you don't have to be. I'm a 38-year-old woman reading this, you know. I thought I'd better do my due diligence if I'm going to recommend it to someone, you know. I recommended it to her very openly, saying I've not read this book, but I've read this author. I really respect them. I really like them. I think that you'll get a lot out of that, you know. So I decided to read it too, and yes, I agree, it is a great book, but honorary mention, I don't think you need this book if you've been practicing for a few years and you've read a number of beginner witchcraft books. But if you do happen to be new, if you're new here, if you're new to witchcraft, you're wanting to dabble, this is a great place to start. And if I hadn't been born in 1986 and I hadn't started with Witching by Fiona Horn, if I'd been born a little bit later and I'd started with Witchery by Juliet Diaz, this is great. So bonus mention. So I talked about this a little bit in some previous videos. This was like my most spiritual, profound, oh, this is just like the Bible to me, reading of this year. This is the Gospel of Mary Magdalene by Yves-Jean Leloup, forward by Jacob Needleman, and this is a highly recommended text if you want to work with Mary Magdalene. A friend of mine, Bronnie Kay, is a priestess of Mary Magdalene and has a channel as well, which I link below, the Celestial Gateway, and just a lot of offerings there which are just amazing, working with Mary Magdalene. This is basically a translation of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, but it also explains it in a scholarly way. So much to dive into. I just absolutely adored this. I just couldn't sum it up. could I? This is just a piece I stumbled on, okay? The teacher seems to be telling us that it is indeed our task to enter into resonance with whatever environment we find ourselves in, and even to tune into our adversary before it's too late. So this is a quote from the gospel. If you go to the altar to make an offering and remember something that your brother holds against you, set aside your offering, go first to be reconciled with your brother, and then go make your offering. Act quickly to be in accord with your adversary while you are still on the way with him. So then explaining. And of course he goes even further than this when he tells his disciples to love their enemies, tune into them so as to be perfect just as your heavenly Father is perfect, or merciful just as your heavenly Father is merciful. But how are we to be in harmony with our enemies, and how do we attune ourselves to the forces that want to harm or destroy us? Certainly this is not a teaching that is telling us to simply give in to these forces and let them have their way. Such adversaries must be confronted in their violence, but without adding to it, without provoking new violence. To be in harmony with our enemies is to skillfully allow their violence to pass through us without contaminating us. Just as in the martial arts, this attunement to our attackers can then awaken a consciousness in them which could help them to get out of the trouble they are in. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Those who abide in this old principle have not yet attained the higher law of harmony, but still yet less is attained through escapism or cowardice. To him who strikes you on one cheek, offer the other one also. These words are also misunderstood. It's important to note that it is not the same cheek that is being offered again. That would indeed suggest some form of masochism or morbid acquiescence. Offering the other cheek means presenting an entirely new and unexpected way of dealing with the problem. It means to oppose violence with consciousness. To look the other in the eye and to regard the other as subject like oneself, and to refuse to be a predictable object. To be in harmony is to enter into resonance with other subjects, with other liberties, but this cannot happen without friction and conflict. Is it even possible? I love this, and I wrote peace at the top because I think there were a number of points that just resonated with me, that just made me cry, to be honest with you, reading this, because I felt like it was like, I want people to hear this. I want people to know. I want people to read this, you know, like, I mean, the Gospel of Mary was discovered in Egypt in 1896. The first translation was only published in 1955, and it's such a recent thing, although there is such a big spiritual following anyway, but it's very new age. There's a lot of like downloads. It's very much like, oh, Mary Magdalene is a sacred prostitute, etc. I mean, personally for me, I would go straight to the Gospels. This is what I would read first. There are a number of the books that my friend Bronia Kay has recommended and that she has read, and I would highly recommend her channel if you're interested in diving a little bit deeper, working with that Christ consciousness, working with Mary Magdalene, working with that energy. But yeah, I think at this time in our history, in the world's history, we need this more than ever. We need to remember that, you know, by responding to violence with more violence is not the right way, but we also don't just allow it either. And I think it's a very poignant thing to remember, especially in the light of current events and tragedies and genocides that are occurring. So this was a beautiful book. I highly recommend it. It was just 10 out of 10 for me. I mean, mwah, love it. Again, this would be like a Bible for me, you know. I really want to continue by reading the Gospel of Thomas and just diving deeper into Mary Magdalene, that tradition as well. I've been working a lot with Mother Mary personally and praying with the Rosary and mysteries, and that's just been a highly profound practice for me in the past year. So I've talked about that in my other videos as well, but yeah, I feel like it's linked. So in a completely different direction, Jack Channick's Qabalah for Wiccans. I loved this book. I loved it more than I expected to. So this is Ceremonial Magic on the Pagan Path. It's for Wiccans, but you don't need to be Wiccan to read it. And essentially, Jack really breaks down a lot of the concepts of Qabalah in a way that is so much easier to understand. It talks about the Tree of Life. It talks about division and recombination. It talks about that difficulty that we have today around binaries and our positions and the masculine, feminine energies, etc. And Jack is a great person to talk about that, being someone who understands that in a very profound way, and also someone who is a Wiccan as well. So from that perspective, really just very, very beautifully eloquent and beautifully written, really thoughtfully prepared, very well researched. I really highly enjoyed it. Also talking about then the 3 triads of the Tree of Life. So it really goes into the whole of the Tree of Life and each of the Sephiroth. It's not a thin book, but there's so much in here. I definitely would like to read this again. I mean, I've got a couple of other books on Qabalah that I want to dive into as well. This has definitely supported me to understanding more about it, But again, a lot of it, I think, with the Qabalah, it kind of almost feel you have to be like memorizing a lot of it. But I think the way that Jack writes about it is very much about experiencing it in real life. And so one of the reasons why I think this book was so accessible is because Jack makes it in a way that you can understand how the Tree of Life and Qabalah comes into your life, how you can see it through the lens of your own lived experience. And that's what makes it really, really good. So I'd highly recommend this book if you're interested in Qabalah and if you're interested in learning more about Qabalah from the perspective of a Wiccan or a witch. It's a great one to deepen into, and it's a great one to start with as well if you are new to Qabalah. This is High Magic by Damien Eccles. I've followed Damien Eccles for years and really enjoyed listening to him speak, and this was a book that was just on my list for a long time. This is definitely like a beginner's book to occult magic, but it's basically like his whole ethos and practice. So if you don't know, at age 18, Damien Eccles was sentenced to death for a crime he didn't commit. He says, "I spent my years in prison training to be a true magician," he recalls. "I used magic, the practice of reshaping reality through our intention and will, to stave off incredible pain, despair and isolation, but the most amazing feat of all that practice was study, and study was to manifest my freedom." With High Magic, this best-selling author shares his first teaching book on powerful spiritual practice that helped him overcome his struggles. So you can learn how to transform your own reality. He offers clear, jargon-free training on meditations, practices such as the fourfold breath, the Kabbalistic cross, the lesser rituals of the pentagram, using sigils and talismans, and working with angelic forces. Magic is a journey, teaches Damien. It's a continuously unfolding path that has no end, meant for questioners, seekers, and those who desire to peel away the surface of reality to see what lies beneath. The book that I would say is bigger and older is Modern Magic by Donald Michael Craig, which I believe Damien also recommends, but this is a little bit more like up to date, a little bit easier to digest, and the exercises are all in here. The fundamental practices, the fourfold breath with visualization, solar application, solar breath, lunar breath. Then there's the middle pillar. So there's information about the middle pillar, then the middle pillar ritual, then the Kabbalistic cross, and then of course the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. The middle pillar by Israel Regardie is also a good one for that, but I think since reading this, I would like to use this. I really appreciate the illustrations. So I just think this is really user-friendly and yeah, very much geared towards a modern audience, and I think that it's a great book. I'm really intrigued to read more of Damien's books. Highly recommend this if you are new to ceremonial magic, or if you're looking to get a refresher, or if you're interested in Damien's work as well. It's a great read. You could be a beginner, you could be an intermediate, you could be an advanced practitioner. You still get stuff from this because I think Damien is that kind of magician. Just really valuable. Really enjoyed this book and would definitely read this again. I just love these illustrations. I find them really, really beautiful. I found this a really, really helpful guide, and it's just a really nice go-to rather than having like a big brick to have to refer to. This is a great one. So a coffee table tome for you. This is The Witch's Workshop by Melissa Jane Madara. This is just gorgeous, right? This is like if you're an art witch, if you're like a kitchen witch, if you're a hearth practitioner, right? And you want a beautiful coffee table book. This is, oh, divine. So a guide to crafting your own magical tools. This is a beautiful book. So it's got paper crafts, this invisible ink here, so you can create your own inks. It's got things like this eco-printed ritual gown. It's basically like arts and crafts and all kinds of things that you can do. Dyeing magical cords here, so there's lots of activities. It's kind of like one of those activity books but for witches. I love the photography. So there's incenses in here. It's really informative. I think that the presentation of this book kind of belies the information that's in here. So don't discount it just because it's pretty, because it is beautiful. I love this whole herb mugwort paper. I think that is something I would really like to practice. Summer solstice rose paper. I mean, come on. This is like baking magic into all of your crafts. Making candles. I have been meaning to make my own candles for years. It's just beautiful. And there's anointing oils, divination oils. This is literally for any witch, but if particularly you are interested in art, crafts, homemaking, and you are someone who has lots of recipe books, you're someone who has lots of craft books, you're going to really love this book. I think it's just stunning, and there are a number of practices that I want to be able to use in my practice. I would highly recommend this. It was just beautiful. A controversial one, this is The Light of Sex, Initiation, Magic and Sacrament by Maria Dinagowska, forward by Hans Thomas Hackel. This was originally published in French in 1932 under the title La Lumière du Sexe. So Maria Denegowska was a Russian occultist, mystic, and founder of the Brotherhood of the Golden Arrow. Her conferences in Paris in the 1930s were attended by many now famous avant-garde and notorious writers and artists, such as Julius Evola, Man Ray, and André Breton. She's also known for her translation of P.B. Randolph's Magica Sexualis, the classic occult text that has survived only through her translation. I have loads and loads of notes in this. There were tons of aspects of this that I was like, huh? What? I have no idea what's going on. I mean, this is very poetic. There's a lot of ritual in here. I think it's probably best that I just read around what the book is. Never before available in English, The Light of Sex expounds the tenets of the revolutionary religious system conceived by Maria Denegowska, Russian mystic, occultist, and esoteric high priestess, rumoured lover of Julius Evola, a self-styled satanic woman of 1930s Paris, centered on what she called the third term of the Trinity, in which the Holy Spirit of the classic Christian Trinity is recognized as the divine feminine. Her practice aims to bring about a reconciliation of the light and dark forces in nature through the union of masculine and feminine. Revealing the spiritually transformative power of sex, she shows how, through mystical sexual practices and veneration of the feminine spirit, growth of the soul, regeneration of the world, and enlightenment of humankind can be achieved. This mystic treatise and guide to the sexually charged rituals that were a cause célèbre in the 1930s Paris was required reading for those seeking to be initiated into Negowska's magical group La Confrérie de la Flèche d'Or, the Brotherhood of the Golden Arrow. It reveals Negowska to be a powerful visionary whose psychic powers were legendary and important figure in the continuing evolution of Western mystery tradition. There is a lot in here that made me balk, I'm not going to lie. You can't go back to your mother's womb to come out again with a new name, but you can again plunge into the woman who accepts you with love to draw from her the light that you are lacking. By Maria Denegowska. I think this is one that truly, to understand, I'll have to read again. I have a number of notes, but again, this was months ago that I read this. There are some illustrations as well of some of the rituals that Maria Denegowska held and taught, I guess. I've got notes here about the separation, no separation between the divine. Oh yeah, I have a note here saying that the argument contradicts itself. So it's non-dualist. Consequently, error will subsist, an illusion, and death will not cease. Negowska seems here to be including her definition of Satanism anything other than non-dualist position that she has expressed. So there's supposed to be non-dualism, but essentially she seems to feel that the notion of separation is in itself satanic. But then she also aligns with that. I feel like I'm confused coming back to this, so I think maybe I should have written my thoughts out in full. There's definitely an aspect of this that is admirable, like the sex is divine aspect of it, but then there's also things that I didn't enjoy or didn't appreciate particularly. There are sections as well that, you know, are very of its time, that are racist and I did not appreciate. All in all, I would say if you are someone who studies the occult, it might be an interesting one for you to read. I think it's interesting around the duality of masculine and feminine, discourse around that. And then sex magic, if you're interested in it, I think it's an interesting read. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as I wanted to, but I think that there's probably a lot to mine in there in terms of understanding that. And it's definitely a product of its time. It was good to read it. Do I think you need to read it? No. I'm mentioning it because I think it's an interesting one for occultists to read, to understand. There are other books, of course, by Maria Denegowska, and I have purchased another to read another. I didn't love it, but I think I'll leave it down to you to read it if you're interested, if you're so inclined. And finally, a book I didn't finish, but I really enjoyed it. I only got about a third of the way through. This is The Witch at the Forest's Edge, and this is 13 Keys to Modern Traditional Witchcraft by Christine Grace, forward by Corey Thomas Hutchinson, author of New World Witchery, and it's definitely in that area. So if you've read New World Witchery, or if you've read that Llewellyn folk magic book that Corey Thomas Hutchinson edited, then you would enjoy this. It's very much like geared towards traditional practitioners, folk practitioners, people who work in the dirt and in the woods, in the forest, with spirits. It's a really lovely book. Definitely has that grounding and rooting, lots of practices, lots of experiences, but I didn't finish it, so that's one I want to finish this year. But I wanted to mention it because it was good and I didn't want it to like fly under the radar. Didn't make it to the end, so if there's anything that I missed, I can't bring that up right now because I didn't completely finish it. So that's mine to finish, and I have a lot of other books as well that I need to finish. I'm currently reading, and I'm also taking part in Candy's challenge on, what's the app called? Terrible at remembering the app, Storygraph. So Candy, Soul and Soil, has a challenge that she started over on Storygraph, and it is called the Candy Reading Challenge, and it starts with January, and I am currently reading Lilith by Nikki Mummery, which I'm enjoying so far. So January The Candy Reading Challenge 2025. Thank you, Candy, for doing this. It's really, really lovely. So January, reopen, retell, read a book that's a retelling. So in January celebrates the reopening of the year. We get to start over and retell our own story. In honor of this fact, January's prompt is for you to read a book that is a retelling of another story. So obviously I am reading Lilith's story. Lilith, who is not really written about in the Bible, but who appears in the alphabet of Mensura and the Zohar and before in Babylonian, and there's just a lot. I've worked with Lilith now for three years, I think. 3 years. Yeah, it's been a wild ride, very intense. I didn't really read many books about Lilith last year, and this year I have a number of books I still need to read about Lilith, and it's gonna have to be part of my mission. But then I'm like, oh, I need to read those books, and oh, I need to read those. I've got such a long reading list, I'm not gonna get to it. Didn't get to my reading list this year. So I think maybe I just need to go with whatever I'm drawn to in the moment. And then of course I'm doing Candy's Reading Challenge, and that's just really, really fun. I just wanted to do something that felt fun and aligned, and I loved Goth Lit November last year, and so it's a nod to that. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it there. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a really, really long one. I'm gonna leave timestamps, of course, so you can jump to whichever book. I would like to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for 2024, for subscribing, for liking, for sharing, for being here, for sharing with me in the comments, and for sharing this journey with me. It's been a really, really tough 2024, but you know, I'm continuing to practice gratitude and just to be present, really. I think that's all I can do, but I'm not here like expecting this, that, or the other for 2025. I'm really just trying to be present and grateful, you know, as much as I can, because there's a lot going on. I feel intense and chaotic a lot of the time. Things aren't always amazing, you know, like on YouTube things can look really, really rosy, and I just want to say that it's not like that in real life, and that even people who look like they got it together, they don't. So just want to say that, and if you are going through something, you know, I'm holding space for you. I really, really hope that this January and the following months are really gentle on you, that you can find some peace, some sense of comfort and contentment this year as well. So also, if you stuck around this far, leave me a little star emoji down below, because I actually put a spell on this video, and if you're watching and you're receiving it, there is a spell for prosperity and blessings of abundance for you during 2025 baked into this video. So please do receive with my love as an offering for 2025. And with that, I will let you go. Please do like, share, subscribe, leave me a comment, let me know what your favourite book or favourite books for 2024 were in the comments box below. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to support me, I have a Patreon where I share occasional extras. There's also a Buy Me a Coffee page, there's a Ko-fi, there's the super thanks down below, there's also a direct PayPal link, so there's a number of ways you can support me, or just being here, liking, sharing, subscribing, clicking over to Instagram, following me over there. If you want to watch some old things on TikTok, you know, all those things, the socials are there. Thank you again for being here. I'm wishing you so much love and blessings for abundance and prosperity and peace in 2025 and beyond. Okay, so much love, sending you many, many blessings, and I look forward to seeing you again in another video really soon. Mwah. Take care, many blessings, bye.